Urbanization represents a major demographic transformation in Africa, with the continent projected to have the fastest growing cities in the world over the next 40 years. Research and empirical evidence estimates that by 2050, Africa's urban centers will be the hosts to over 1.5 billion people, which represents 60% of the continent's projected population. Zimbabwe is no exception to these trends. The census report of 2012 showed that Zimbabwe's urban population is projected to grow from 4.3 million in 2012 to 6.5 million in 2032. Local authorities in Zimbabwe play an important role in the delivery of fundamental public services in the context of the growth trajectory. In recent years, Zimbabwe's urban centers have experienced rapid urban sprawl in peri-urban state land and land designated for agriculture. Unfortunately, this urban sprawl has not been supported by a corresponding growth in fundamental public infrastructure, such as adequate housing, social amenities, and requisite infrastructure. The absence of infrastructure has created settlements that are not serviced or are poorly serviced. This has increased the risk of chronic health challenges, waterborne as well as communicable disease outbreaks such as cholera and typhoid. It is against this background that the current study, conducted by Transparency International Zimbabwe, in collaboration with the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission and with support from Embassy of Sweden in Harare, explores urban and peri-urban land governance in Zimbabwe. The study comes at an opportune time when Zimbabweans still have vivid memories of several cases of housing demolitions resulting from land corruption in urban and peri-urban areas. Using documentary review, a cross-sectional survey, and qualitative data, the study aimed to achieve the following objectives: to gather opinions and perceptions regarding the systems and processes of urban and peri-urban land governance, to examine the institutional and legislative framework for urban and peri-urban land governance, and to analyze the emerging patterns, scope, scale, and impact of urban and peri-urban land-based corruption. A network involving local authorities, officials, politically exposed persons, and private land developers has been implicated in several corrupt land transactions. Corrupt practices in this sector have given rise to the term land barons, which is colloquially used in reference to individuals who sell land illegally or fraudulently. In other cases, traditional leaders have been implicated in the scandals allegedly for transacting communal land for personal gain outside provisions of the governing legislation. The study unearths massive corruption and unprocedural urban and peri-urban land acquisition and an ingrained systemic rot in governance. The findings of this study shows us that corruption in urban and peri-urban land is fueled by weak legislation for land governance, lack of public knowledge regarding land acquisition, abuse of political power, selective enforcement of the law, and weak land governance and anti-corruption institutions. The report highlighted a general overlap and lack of clarity regarding the mandate of numerous national and local government departments. This multiplicity of land management authorities in Zimbabwe creates challenges of transparency and accountability in the land governance value chain. A case in point is the seeming conflict between the Traditional Leaders Act, the Rural District Council Act, and the Communal Land Act over the allocation of communal land. The study revealed that 34.4% of the survey respondents were not aware of the actual procedures involved in the purchase of urban land. This implies that they are not privy to the baseline information to ensure that they are not swindled of their money. The lack of baseline knowledge increases the risk of exposure to fraudulent land dealers. There have been assertions that farms surrounding cities have been allocated to cooperatives to create new constituencies that are loyal to political parties in major centers like Harare. However, ownership through title deeds is deliberately delayed as a way to enforce loyalty. Occupants are threatened with repossession of stands if they are no longer visible in political gatherings. It has been observed that the stipulated land allocation process was not followed, as evident by post-2000 invasion of peri-urban farms and the demolition of houses during Operation Murambatsvina, in which nearly 1.2 million people were affected. Studies have shown that the operation resulted in loss of property, dignity, shelter, livelihood, and a disruption of the family unit. There has been growing concern over the allocation of stands to people who are not registered on the waiting list. The increased allocation of people who are not on the waiting list has raised issues over the utility of the list in the allocation decision. Over 47.1% of the respondents were not registered on the council waiting list. The study noted that the increased reluctance to register on the list was partly motivated by the growing opportunities to access urban land without registration, but through corrupt officials. Of the 52.9% who are registered on the council waiting list, 61% have been on the list for more than 5 years. Key players in illegal land transactions have used politics to illegally and unprocedurally acquire land, develop and sell stands. This has created untouchables who develop on state land without due process for private gain. According to the suspension letter of the former mayor Jacob Mafume, allegations are that he approached Harare council officials, namely Mr. Nekairo Zehonye and Mrs. Tendai Koke, to allocate unserviced residential stands to Rotina Mafume and Rumimbo Mafume in Wesley Township in March 2020 without following the council allocation procedure. In another high-profile case, corruption on urban state land by the former Minister of Local Government, Dr. Ignatius Chombo, acquired vast tracts of land within Greater Harare and registered them in companies associated with him. Land reserved for recreational activities would end up having title deeds in his company's name. A case in point, Stand 61 Helensvale, Harare, measuring almost 20 hectares, which the minister paid only $2,300, obviously an understated value. The survey targeted 1,000 residents drawn from the 4 cities, namely Harare, Bulawayo, Gweru, and Mutare. In-depth interviews were conducted across the country with 20 respondents from national, provincial, and local government, as well as civil society, academia, housing cooperatives, and private land developers. The respondents identified various corrupt acts and malpractices within land management. These include unprocedural acquisition of peri-urban, state and private land, continued violation of standard procedures of allocation by land council officials, unprocedural and corrupt change of land use, rise of allocation of land to people who are not on the waiting list, corrupt acquisition of title deeds on state land, subdivision and allocation of stands on the state land by beneficiaries of the land reform programs, failure by councillors, land dealers to deliver stands after collecting money from unsuspecting public, double or multiple allocation of stands. The impact of corruption in land governance adversely affects regular citizens. Unsuspecting residents have suffered the heaviest loss after purchasing unscrupulously acquired land, oftentimes losing their entire life savings and destruction of personal belongings. The national and local government institutions are thus confronted with the dilemma of either demolishing the new settlements and render people homeless, or regularizing the settlements while taking legal action on, often untouchable, land developers and their associates. The study established that some private land developers and cooperatives collected money from potential land buyers but did not deliver the stands. 600 respondents cited weak legislation and political exposure of the land dealers as major challenges to fighting land corruption, scoring 79% and 67% respectively. The following recommendations came as a result of this study. Government should 1. Appoint a single land management authority to deal with the confusion emanating from the wide institutional framework for land management. 2. Harmonize the various land management legislation to establish designated focal points of accountability in the land governance system. 3. Revive the parallel development policy to ensure that construction of houses and occupation only happens after the development of on-site and off-site infrastructure and services. 4. Maintain and update record of all urban state land and ensure measures are taken against all who have illegally acquired such land. 5. Ensure the implementation of the investigation of urban and peri-urban state land by the Justice Uchenna Commission of Inquiry and facilitate for further in-depth study and, where necessary, take corrective action to ensure compliance with the law. 6. Ensure compliance of private land developers, cooperatives, and other players with their various tax obligations and the payment of intrinsic value on land. 7. Produce and regularly update a procedure manual for the development of land, showing clear steps from land identification, ownership, verification, application for development and issuance of a development permit, subdivision proposal, and so on. 8. Properly and effectively monitor housing cooperatives to ensure compliance with the Cooperative Societies Act and other legislation on issues such as preparing and submitting audited financial statements. 9. Build capacity for the automation of the Deeds Registry Office, use of securitized paper for title deeds, and use of biometric security features when signing power of attorney. There is need for the local authorities to 1. Invest in the automation of the engineering, land management and housing divisions of council to reduce the risk of production of fraudulent layout plans and survey reports. 2. Update valuation roles to ensure the proper valuation of urban land in line with the prevailing market dynamics. 3. Ensure and enforce the development of on-site and off-site infrastructure and services happens ahead of the construction and occupation of houses. 4. Publish waiting lists and ensure that any allocation of land is duly compliant with the legislation and bylaws. 5. Publish a record of all cooperatives and private land developers in council area and their compliance with legislation and standard land transaction requirements, procedures, and processes. Civil organizations and citizens need to build a movement of urban and peri-urban land management to enhance public awareness of land governance, legislation, and institutional frameworks. In conclusion, there is an extensive discretionary power without viable supporting measures of accountability among key public officers, compounding the problem. Politically connected private land developers who have made huge profits from the illegal sale of land have used their wealth to capture government officials or departments, including the law enforcement and judiciary apparatus of the state. Implementation of these recommendations will ensure fair and equitable access to land for all citizens, ensuring the right to shelter.